I was never supposed to be the wife. Not according to my daughter-in-law or her family. Years ago, she cornered my husband and forced him into a marriage with her sister. A marriage built on manipulation, guilt, and a secret I wasn't meant to know. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And on the night of my celebration, with every eye fixed on us, my husband walked in, held my hand in front of everyone, and revealed the truth they had spent years trying to hide. They thought they had erased me from his life. They had no idea I was the chapter he never stopped reading. I always believed families fell apart slowly, like old fabric unraveling thread by thread. But with mine, it happened in one single, brutal moment. I remember the day my daughter-in-law pulled my husband aside during a family gathering. She thought I didn't hear her, but the walls were thin. Her voice was sharp, steady, rehearsed, almost cold. She said he deserved stability, and that I wasn't the kind of woman who could give it to him. I froze, standing behind the kitchen doorway, holding a bowl of salad like it weighed 100 pounds. My husband didn't say anything. That silence hurt more than any insult could. My daughter-in-law continued, insisting that her sister was the right choice, a woman who would fit the family image, someone younger, quieter, easier to mold. The words tasted like poison as they drifted through the air. I felt my chest tighten, my breath disappear, as if someone had reached inside me and taken something I couldn't name. I wanted to confront them, to scream, to throw the bowl on the ground and demand answers. But instead, I stood there, invisible in my own home. And when my daughter-in-law stepped closer to him, lowering her voice, I knew something was terribly wrong. She spoke about arrangements, about timing, about how everyone already expects this marriage. That was when I realized they had been planning this for months. My hands trembled so badly that I had to set the bowl on the counter. I felt a heat rising inside me, not anger yet, but something deeper. A warning, a voice telling me to pay attention. I walked back to the living room in silence, forcing a smile, pretending nothing was happening behind that thin wall. But inside, everything was collapsing. Later that night, my husband acted normal. He kissed me softly, asked about my day, and even suggested we watch a movie together. I watched his face carefully, searching for guilt, doubt, anything that would confirm what I heard. But he was calm, too calm, like a man who had already made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to reveal it. I lay awake until dawn, not crying. Those tears would come later. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me, knowing that the life I had built with him was slipping through my fingers. That was the night I understood something painful. When people decide to replace you, they don't warn you. They simply begin. My husband left on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the kind of quiet morning when nothing seems capable of going wrong. I was preparing coffee, humming to myself, when he walked into the kitchen with a strange expression, half regret, half relief. He didn't sit down. He didn't look me in the eyes. He just stood there, holding his car keys like they were a lifeline. And before I could say a word, he exhaled and whispered, "We need to talk." Those 4 words have a way of turning warm homes into cold ruins. I tried to smile, tried to steady my voice, but something in me already knew. My daughter-in-law's shadow hovered over that conversation like a storm cloud waiting to burst. He told me he felt pressured, that he needed clarity, that he had to make choices that would benefit everyone. But none of those words were his. I recognized the script, the same manipulative tone my daughter-in-law used whenever she wanted to control a situation. She had coached him. She had planted every seed. When he finally said he was leaving to spend time with her family, especially with her sister, I felt my knees weaken. He said it so carefully, almost tenderly, as if soft words could make betrayal less sharp. My world blurred for a moment. I swallowed the pain, nodded like a woman on autopilot, and asked if he was sure. He didn't hesitate. That hurt more than anything. The man who once fought to be with me didn't even take a second to reconsider. He packed lightly, just enough clothes for a few weeks. But the way he closed the suitcase told me those weeks would become months. He avoided my touch, avoided my questions, avoided every part of our history. And when he walked out the door, something inside me broke so quietly that even I almost didn't hear it. I watched his car disappear down the street, and for the first time in decades, the house felt like a stranger's home. I spent the rest of the day pretending to function. I cleaned things that weren't dirty. I folded clothes I had already folded. I wiped the same countertop 3 times. My mind kept replaying his words, twisting them, trying to find a meaning that hurt less. But there wasn't one. I realized that my daughter-in-law had done more than push him. She had convinced him he was making a noble choice. A choice to abandon me for the good of the family. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I never drank. The silence felt heavy, like a punishment. But in that silence, a small voice inside me began to whisper something new. Not weakness, not despair, but strength. A quiet, steady promise. They think they've won, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. It was the first time in days that I felt something other than heartbreak. It was the first spark of the woman I was about to become. The first rumors arrived before the official news. That's how small communities work. Truth doesn't walk, it whispers. I was at the grocery store when I heard 2 women talking near the canned goods aisle. They lowered their voices when they saw me, but not fast enough. I caught words like wedding, sister, and finally making it official. My heart didn't just sink, it cracked. I put down the basket and walked away before my face could betray the storm inside me. That night, my daughter-in-law called. She never called me unless she wanted something, so I already knew this wasn't a courtesy. Her tone was falsely sweet, sugar over shards of glass. She said she hoped I was doing well, and then, almost casually, dropped the bomb. Her sister and my husband were getting married. She spoke as if she were announcing the weather, like it was natural, inevitable, harmless. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles went white. I couldn't speak at first. There was a long silence, the kind that changes people. Then she said something that burned itself into my memory. At least now, everything is where it should be. Those words told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about love. This was about control, image, and power. She had rearranged the pieces of her family like furniture, and my husband had allowed himself to be moved like a chair. When I finally found my voice, I simply asked, "Does he feel the same?" She laughed softly, almost pityingly, and said, "He knows this is for the best." For the best. For whose best? Certainly not mine. Certainly not his, if he still had a soul buried under all that pressure. I ended the call politely, because I refused to let her hear my pain. She wanted me broken. I refused to give her that satisfaction. The official invitation came a week later. It wasn't sent to me directly, of course. It appeared in a family group chat, with photos of flowers and a caption about new beginnings. My name was nowhere in the plans. I wasn't the ex-wife. I wasn't even acknowledged as part of the past. I was simply erased. Some relatives sent me private messages, apologizing, saying they didn't know what to say. I understood. Cowardice rarely comes announced. It just wears a polite smile. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't attend. Not out of weakness, but out of dignity. I refused to stand there like a ghost watching my own life rewritten. Instead, I stayed home, cooked myself a simple meal, and lit a candle on the table. Not for them, for me. As I watched the flame dance, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end of your story." And even though my heart was bleeding, a strange peace settled inside me. They could have their ceremony. I would have my future. The wedding photos appeared online before the vows were even finished. People posted them with captions like, "Perfect day," and "A love meant to be." I stared at those images in disbelief. My husband, dressed in a suit I picked out for him years ago, standing beside a woman who had once hugged me at Christmas as if she cared. The smiles looked wide, but not real. Forced. Tight. As if everyone involved was trying to convince themselves this wasn't a mistake. The more I looked, the clearer it became that nothing about that marriage was born from love. Her smile never reached her eyes. His shoulders were stiff, his posture uneasy. Even in the photos where they tried to pose like a happy couple, something was missing: warmth. Truth. connection. It was like watching two actors play roles they didn't audition for. A performance for the benefit of others, orchestrated by the one person pulling all the strings, my daughter-in-law. People around town pretended to celebrate the union, but privately, they whispered. I heard things like, "He didn't look happy, that girl seems nervous," and "Why does it all feel so rushed?" Some even approached me with condolences disguised as compliments. "You're so strong, Evelyn. I admire how gracefully you're handling this." I smiled politely, but inside, I felt the sting of humiliation. Not because I had lost him, but because they thought I had lost myself too. I tried to move on. I filled my days with long walks, old hobbies, and visits with friends. But every night, when the world got quiet, memories of him would slip through the cracks of my mind. The good moments, the laughter, the promises. I wondered if any of it had been real, or if the marriage had been destined to fail from the moment she, the puppet master, began manipulating him. I hated that she had that much power. I hated that he gave it to her. Months passed, and the cracks in their perfect life became visible even from afar. I heard about arguments, public ones. Her sister demanding things he couldn't give. My daughter-in-law stepping in, always controlling, always reminding him of the family image. The marriage wasn't a union. It was a contract forged in pressure, sustained by pride, and held together with fear of public failure. I realized something important then. No one can truly be happy living a life chosen by others. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my porch, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe their collapse isn't my tragedy. Maybe it's my freedom. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, not bitterness, but clarity. They had taken my husband, yes, but they had also freed me from someone who could be manipulated so easily. My life, my peace, my future, those were still mine. And little did they know, the day would come when everything they built on lies would crumble right in front of me. It's funny how life shifts when you're no longer carrying someone who weighs you down. Little by little, my world began to breathe again. I rearranged my house, painted the living room, planted flowers in the garden, simple but powerful acts of reclaiming my space. People said I looked younger, calmer, lighter. And the strangest part? They were right. Without his constant emotional hesitation, without her shadow looming over us, I finally felt free. My routines became rituals. Every morning, I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the aroma. I took long walks, letting the sun warm my face and the wind clear my thoughts. For the first time in years, I felt connected to myself instead of waiting for someone else to acknowledge me. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in quietly through new habits, new breaths, new mornings where your heart doesn't hurt as much as it did yesterday. Meanwhile, their marriage was unraveling, and everyone knew it except the two people pretending it wasn't. I heard about arguments in parking lots, slammed doors, neighbors complaining about late-night shouting. My daughter-in-law tried to hide the mess, but chaos has a way of leaking out through the cracks. Her sister was overwhelmed, insecure, constantly comparing herself to an image she could never fulfill. And my daughter-in-law? She was furious. Furious that the perfect marriage she forced into existence wasn't obeying her design. One afternoon, a cousin visited me with an expression that said everything before he even opened his mouth. He told me my husband looked miserable, thinner, quieter, that he seemed like a man living in a cage built from other people's expectations. A strange mix of pity and detachment washed over me. I didn't want him suffering, but I also didn't want him back. Not anymore. The woman I was rebuilding had no place in a life built on manipulation. It was around that time that I decided to do something symbolic. I threw away the old anniversary cards, the dried flowers he once gave me, and the little notes I had kept in a box under my bed. Not out of anger, out of liberation. Love that isn't chosen isn't love, it's dependency. And I refused to hold on to anything that kept me tied to a past where I wasn't valued. The more I let go, the more room I created for myself to grow. And then came the news that set everything in motion. The kind of news that feels like a whisper from destiny. My friend told me that the community center was hosting a gala, an elegant evening where people gathered, danced, reconnected. She insisted I go, said I needed to be seen again. At first, I hesitated. But something inside me, a voice stronger than ever, said go. I had no idea that saying yes to that simple invitation would become the moment everything changed, and the night they would all see a truth they had spent years trying to erase. The night of the gala felt like stepping into another life, one I didn't know I deserved anymore, yet one that welcomed me as if I had never left. I wore a deep blue dress, simple but elegant, the kind of dress that makes you stand taller without trying. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I finally looked alive. I took a deep breath, grabbed my shawl, and walked out the door with a confidence I thought I had lost forever. The community center glowed with warm lights, soft music drifting through the entrance, like an invitation. As I stepped inside, conversations hushed for just a moment. People stared, not out of pity, but out of surprise. I wasn't the abandoned woman anymore. I wasn't the victim in everyone's whispered stories. I was someone reborn, someone who carried her wounds with grace instead of shame. Compliments came quickly. You look radiant. It's so good to see you. We missed you. I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in so long. I spent the first part of the evening greeting old friends, sipping wine, and letting laughter loosen the last knots in my chest. And then something unexpected happened. A man approached me, someone I knew only faintly from community events. His name was Andrew. He complimented my dress, but not in the way men usually do. There was warmth in his voice, sincerity in his eyes. We talked, slowly at first, then easily, like two people who didn't need to prove anything. I felt a sense of comfort I hadn't felt in years. As we talked, I realized how starved I had been for genuine connection. Andrew asked about my hobbies, my thoughts, my life, not about my husband or the scandal or the marriage everyone whispered about. He talked to me as if I mattered, as if I existed beyond the chaos. And for the first time since my world fell apart, I felt seen. Not as a wife, not as a victim, but as Evelyn. Simply Evelyn. As the evening progressed, the music shifted into something softer, more intimate. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, creating a gentle sway of silhouettes under the dim lights. Andrew extended his hand to me. My immediate reaction was hesitation, memories of old pains rising like ghosts trying to protect me. But then I remembered the promise I made to myself. This is your future. Don't let the past choose for you. So I placed my hand in his. And as we danced, slowly, tentatively, something inside me cracked open in the most unexpected way. Not sadness, not regret, but hope. A hope so delicate I was afraid to breathe too deeply in case it shattered. I didn't know then that this night would become the beginning of a chain of events leading all of us, me, my husband, my daughter-in-law, her sister, back into the same room again. I didn't know the truth was already making its way toward me. But I felt something in the air that night, something undeniable. Life was shifting. And for once, it was shifting in my favor. A week after the gala, the photos began circulating online. Not the photos of my husband's new marriage. Those had long lost their shine. These were different. Pictures of me, smiling, dancing, standing tall in that deep blue dress. Pictures where I looked happy. Authentically, unmistakably happy. And nothing travels faster in a small community than the unexpected return of a woman they thought had vanished into sorrow. I didn't post the photos myself. Someone else had taken them and shared them with kind words, tagging me and praising my strength and grace. The comments flooded in, people cheering me on, admiring my resilience, even apologizing for having judged too quickly. It was overwhelming at first, but also healing. The narrative had changed. I wasn't the abandoned wife in whispered conversations anymore. I was the woman who rose. My daughter-in-law, of course, saw the photos immediately. And she called me, not out of concern, but out of panic disguised as curiosity. Her voice was tight, like she was trying too hard to sound casual. "We saw you at the gala," she said. "You looked different." I could hear the unspoken questions behind her tone. How did I get there? Why was I smiling? Who was I with? Most importantly, why does she look happier than us? I answered her kindly, without giving her any satisfaction. I simply said, "I had a lovely evening." The silence on the other end of the line was sharp enough to cut. For the first time ever, she didn't know how to control the narrative. She couldn't decide who I spoke to, who I danced with, who supported me. I belonged to no one's script anymore, not hers, not my husband's, not the family's. And that terrified her more than anything. Now that I was visible again, people began sharing small details about my husband's life. Not gossip, more like concern. They said he looked tired, worn down, defeated. That he barely smiled. That he apologized too much in public. That his new wife seemed anxious, insecure, constantly trying to prove something. It wasn't schadenfreude that made me listen, it was closure. I had suspected their marriage was built on manipulation, but now it was clear. No one inside that house was happy. And then came the moment that shifted everything. One afternoon, while I was watering my plants, a neighbor approached me timidly. She said my husband had passed by her house earlier, stood on the sidewalk across from mine, and watched the front door, just watching. Not with anger. Not with pride. With longing. Regret. The past had begun knocking, quietly at first, but unmistakably. And I knew deep down, whatever was coming next would rewrite everything they believed about me. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day when the sky feels heavy with secrets. I was in the kitchen, preparing a pot of soup, when I heard 3 soft knocks on the door. Gentle, familiar, almost hesitant. My heart paused, not because I knew who it was, but because a part of me already felt it. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. And there he was, my husband, the man who left me to marry another woman, standing on my porch, drenched in rain, looking like a ghost searching for a place to rest. He looked thinner, older, worn down by something deeper than time. His eyes, once filled with certainty and pride, were now clouded with regret. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. No words, no accusations, no explanations. Just a silence, so heavy it felt like the two of us were standing inside all the years we had lost. He finally whispered my name, almost like a prayer. "Evelyn." His voice broke on the last syllable. I didn't invite him in. Not immediately. I stepped outside under the porch light, wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, and simply asked, "What are you doing here?" He looked down, as if ashamed of the answer. "I don't know where else to go," he said. Those words, so small, so vulnerable, hit me like a wave. This wasn't a man returning to reclaim his place. This was a man unraveling at the seams, realizing the life he built had turned into a cage. He told me things I didn't ask for. That the marriage was falling apart. That the pressure, the expectations, the manipulation had become unbearable. That he felt trapped in a life he never truly chose. "I thought doing what they wanted would make things right," he said. "But I lost myself. And I lost you." I listened in silence, feeling the rain mist across my skin. His confessions weren't healing me. They were confirming what I had known all along. Then he said something that shattered what was left of the past. "I never stopped loving you." I closed my eyes, letting the words pass through me like a gust of wind. Maybe once, those words would have saved us. Maybe once, they would have melted every hurt. But now, they felt like an apology arriving years too late. Love without loyalty is just longing. And longing doesn't fix broken vows. I finally told him he needed to leave. Not harshly, but firmly, with the quiet strength I had earned through every tear and every sunrise since he left. He begged me to let him talk inside, even for a few minutes, but I shook my head. "You didn't choose me when it mattered," I said. "Now I choose myself." His shoulders collapsed, as if the weight of those words finally broke him. He nodded, stepped back into the rain, and walked away slowly, his figure blurring into the storm. When I closed the door, I expected pain. Instead, I felt something surprising: peace. A peace so deep it felt like I had finally reclaimed not just my home, but my soul. I had no idea his visit would ignite a chain reaction, one that would shake their whole family, expose the truth, and lead all of us toward the night when everything would finally be revealed. 2 days after he showed up at my door, the storm returned, but this time, it wasn't rain. It was her, his new wife. The woman my daughter-in-law had forced into his life, like a puzzle piece hammered into the wrong place. I was sipping tea on my porch when her car pulled up abruptly, tires crunching against the gravel. She stepped out with trembling hands, mascara smudged, and eyes swollen from crying. She didn't look like a woman seeking confrontation. She looked like someone whose world was cracking open. She approached slowly, her breath uneven, clutching her coat as if it were the only thing holding her together. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice breaking. I hesitated, not out of anger, but out of caution. Letting her inside felt too intimate, too symbolic, so I nodded toward the porch bench instead. She sat down heavily, staring at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Finally, she spoke. And what she said surprised me. "He told me he came here." I didn't respond. She continued, "He told me he still cares about you." Her voice cracked on the last word. She wasn't angry. She was terrified. Terrified of losing control. Terrified of losing him. Terrified of facing a truth she probably always sensed. Their marriage wasn't built on love. It was built on pressure. And pressure has a way of bursting at the seams. She admitted things I never expected to hear. That he had been distant. That he avoided conversations. That he woke up at night, restless, whispering my name without realizing it. She confessed she felt like a placeholder, a woman standing on ground that never belonged to her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I thought if I loved him enough, he would forget you." Hearing that didn't fill me with victory. It filled me with something much more complicated. Sorrow. Sorrow for both of us. Then, suddenly, her sadness shifted into something sharper. "Did you ask him to leave me?" she demanded, her voice rising as fear twisted into desperation. I shook my head calmly. "No," I said. "I didn't ask him for anything, and that was the truth. I didn't want him back. I didn't want the man who abandoned me just because someone else whispered loudly enough in his ear." But she didn't understand that. To her, losing him meant losing the life she fought so desperately to keep. That's when she told me the part that made my stomach drop. My daughter-in-law had encouraged her to come. She had told her to confront the problem at its source. According to her, I was the problem. I was the threat. I was the ghost haunting their marriage. In that moment, everything clicked. My daughter-in-law hadn't lost control. She was trying to regain it. She had sent this poor woman to me like a messenger of chaos, hoping I would break, hoping I would falter, hoping I would confirm her narrative. Instead, I looked her in the eyes and said gently but firmly, "Your marriage is between you and him, not me." She stared at me, speechless. No anger, no hatred. Just the dawning realization that I was not her enemy. I watched as her shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," before walking back to her car, defeated but not destroyed. As she drove away, I understood something powerful. I no longer lived in their story. They lived in mine. And the truth, the real truth, was getting closer. Closer to breaking them. Closer to freeing me. Closer to the moment when our lives would collide again in the most unexpected way. The very next morning, my phone rang. Not once, but 5 times. I ignored the first 4, savoring my breakfast and the quiet peace of my home. But on the 5th call, when I saw my daughter-in-law's name flashing on the screen, something inside me told me to answer. The moment I picked up, her voice cut through the line like a blade, sharp, frantic, trembling. "What did you say to her?" she demanded. No greeting. No pretense. Just pure panic. I leaned back in my chair, letting her desperation spill into the silence between her words. "I told her the truth. I replied calmly. That answer only unnerved her more. She hissed accusations, trying to force me into a corner, claiming I had interfered, insisting I had stirred up drama, saying I was trying to destroy their marriage. I almost laughed at the irony. They had destroyed my marriage in broad daylight, yet the moment their own foundation cracked, she pointed the finger at me. When she realized intimidation wasn't working, she switched tactics. Her voice softened, falsely, sickeningly, dripping with a sweetness she didn't know how to use genuinely. "Evelyn, be reasonable," she cooed. "We're just trying to keep the family together." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me like dirty water. She didn't want unity. She wanted control. She wasn't protecting the family. She was protecting her power. I asked her a simple question. Why does my happiness threaten you so much? Silence. Sharp and immediate. The kind of silence that exposes the truth faster than any confession. She tried to recover, stumbling over excuses, but the crack had already formed. She was threatened, not by me, but by what I represented. A woman who had risen from the ashes she thought would bury me. Then she made a mistake. A big one. She revealed the real reason for her panic. "He came to see you," she said, her voice quivering with fury. "He should have talked to me first. I'm the one he's supposed to trust." Her mask slipped completely. It wasn't the wife who sent her to confront me. It wasn't concern. It was her. Always her. The puppet master losing control of her favorite puppet. I spoke slowly, deliberately, so she could hear every syllable. "He came on his own. And he left on his own. What happens in your marriage is your responsibility, not mine." She exhaled sharply, like someone punched her. And then, in a final attempt to reclaim dominance, she muttered, "You won't win, Evelyn." I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile she couldn't see, but could feel. "I'm not playing," I whispered back. She hung up on me, but I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the sunlight streaming through my window. I felt no fear, no shame, no bitterness, only clarity. For years, she had orchestrated every event, every decision, every whispered manipulation. But now, her empire was cracking. And the part that terrified her most was simple. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I was simply living, and my existence alone was enough to unravel everything she built. What none of them knew yet was this. The truth wasn't just approaching, it was already here, gathering speed, ready to crash into all of us at a celebration none of them imagined would become the turning point of our lives. A week passed in a strange, humming quiet. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from tension gathering in the air like thunder preparing to break. I went about my days normally, tending my garden, visiting the market, meeting friends for coffee. But beneath it all, I felt something shifting, something approaching, something inevitable. And then, one morning, as I checked my mailbox, I saw it. An envelope with gold trim and my name handwritten across the front. At first, I thought it must have been a mistake. But when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. It was an invitation to a family celebration hosted by my daughter-in-law, her sister, and my estranged husband. A grand event, a gathering of unity, gratitude, and family honor. They were desperate to show the community they were stable, happy, unshaken by rumors, and desperate to show me that I was irrelevant, that they were winning. They wanted me there to witness their performance. I should have declined. I should have thrown the invitation in the trash and moved on with my life. But something inside me, not spite, not vengeance, but a quiet, powerful intuition, whispered, "Go." Not to humiliate them, not to confront them, but because the truth, the real truth, was already bubbling beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. And I knew, with a certainty that startled me, that this event would be the stage for that eruption. When people in town heard that I was invited, they reacted with shock. Some warned me not to go, afraid I'd be ambushed with humiliation. Others encouraged me, saying my presence alone would expose the insecurity behind their show. Andrew, yes, the kind, sincere man from the gala, simply looked at me and said, "Go if it feels right. And if you want company, I'll be there." His words grounded me. I didn't need protection. But knowing I wasn't alone, that mattered. The days leading up to the celebration were filled with tension, whispers, and small revelations. I overheard someone at the bakery mention that my daughter-in-law's sister had been crying in public again. Someone else mentioned seeing my husband wandering the aisles of the supermarket, looking dazed and lost. The facade was failing, and they were clinging to this event as their final chance to reclaim control. But life doesn't obey the desperate. The night before the celebration, I laid out a dress. Not the blue one from the gala. Something new, soft silver, elegant, graceful. A symbol, not of seduction or revenge, but of evolution. Of who I had become through everything they tried to take from me. I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection. And for the first time in a very long time, I whispered aloud, "You are not the woman they left behind. You are the woman they never expected to rise." And deep down, I knew tomorrow would not be about them exposing their strength. It would be about the truth exposing their lies. And I was ready to face it. The evening of the celebration arrived cloaked in an uneasy stillness, the kind that settles right before something breaks. I stood at my front door with the silver dress flowing softly around me, my shawl draped over my shoulders. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement. This was a turning point. A moment that would divide my life into before and after. I took one slow breath, locked the door behind me, and stepped into a night that already felt charged with fate. The venue was grander than I expected, chandeliers glowing through tall windows, music floating outside in elegant waves. Cars lined the driveway. People mingled near the entrance, dressed in their finest. But the moment I walked in, conversations dimmed. Heads turned. Eyes widened. I didn't walk like a wounded ex-wife returning to old ruins. I walked like a woman who had rebuilt herself brick by brick. My silver dress caught the light, but it wasn't the fabric that stunned them. It was the woman inside it. My daughter-in-law was the first to spot me. She froze mid-sentence, her smile snapping off her face like a mask falling to the floor. Her eyes widened with something between disbelief and alarm. I could see the question in her gaze. How dare she look this alive? She hurried toward me, pretending enthusiasm, her voice high-pitched and brittle. "Evelyn, you made it," she chirped, the lie trembling beneath every syllable. I simply smiled and replied, "Of course. I was invited." Her sister, the woman who married my husband, stood farther back, her posture stiff, her face pale. She looked at me as if seeing her own future reflected in my presence. A future where she might one day stand alone, free or broken, depending on the choices she made now. And then I saw him, my husband. He stood by the refreshments table, holding a glass he hadn't touched. When he saw me, his entire face changed. Shock, regret, awe, and something he hadn't shown in years, longing. I didn't walk toward him. I didn't even acknowledge him. I greeted other guests, spoke with old acquaintances, laughed gently at kind compliments. Every step I took, every word I spoke, chipped away at the carefully constructed image they had built in my absence. I wasn't the abandoned woman they whispered about. I wasn't the cautionary tale they used to validate their choices. I was the living proof that rising isn't just possible, it's inevitable when you've been pushed to the ground enough times. As the evening unfolded, I could feel the tension coil tighter around my daughter-in-law and her sister. They hovered around my husband, whispering frantically, fussing with his jacket, trying to manage his reactions. But he wasn't listening to them. He wasn't reacting to them. His eyes kept drifting to me, searching, remembering, unraveling. A man who once walked away now stood unable to look anywhere else. And then, something unexpected happened. While I stood near the edge of the hall, speaking with a neighbor, Andrew entered the venue. Tall, composed, dressed impeccably, a quiet presence that drew attention without demanding it. He walked directly toward me with the kind of confidence that only sincerity can give. When he reached me, he gently touched my elbow and said, "You look breathtaking, Evelyn." His voice wasn't loud, but loud enough for the room, and for them, to hear. My daughter-in-law's face blanched. Her sister stiffened. My husband closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a blow straight to the soul. In that instant, the carefully curated narrative collapsed. I wasn't the past haunting them. I was the present they never expected to face. And the truth was only just beginning to surface. The moment Andrew joined me, something subtle but powerful shifted in the atmosphere. It was as if the entire room inhaled all at once. Conversations faltered. Eyes darted in our direction. People who once pitied me now watched with a fascination they couldn't hide. I could feel their perceptions rearranging themselves in real time, no longer seeing me as the woman left behind, but as the woman who had risen into a life far more graceful than the one she lost. Andrew stood beside me with an effortless confidence, not possessive or showy, but grounding. His presence didn't overshadow me. It strengthened me. When he spoke with others, he was warm, respectful, intelligent. And when he looked at me, there was a softness in his eyes that made the air feel warmer. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was dignity, recognition. A reminder that I deserved to stand tall long before anyone tried to take that from me. Across the room, my daughter-in-law whispered furiously into her husband's ear. Her gestures were sharp, panicked, like a conductor losing control of her orchestra. She kept glancing toward me, her face tightening each time she saw me smiling or speaking with someone. Her sister stood stiffly at her side, her expression painted with anxiety. She was the most fragile of them all, trapped in a marriage she now knew had been built on shifting sand. But the most telling reaction came from my husband. He stood frozen in place, gripping his untouched glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes were locked on me, not with anger, but with a haunting realization. The woman he had left behind no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, untouchable. And in that recognition, something inside him broke, the illusion that he had moved on, that he was satisfied, that the life he had chosen was enough. When Andrew laughed softly at something I said, the sound reached my husband like a blade. He took a step toward us, then stopped, as if suddenly unsure of his right to approach. His lips parted, but no words emerged. The man who walked away so confidently now trembled at the possibility of being forgotten. And that was the moment I realized something profound. I wasn't the one who had been replaced. He was. As more guests approached me, offering compliments and embracing me warmly, my daughter-in-law's panic escalated. She tried to redirect attention by telling elaborate stories, making loud jokes, even raising her glass in exaggerated toasts. But no one looked at her the way they once did. Her spotlight had dimmed. Her influence had thinned. Every time the room glanced toward me instead of her, her smile faltered a little more. At one point, she tried to intercept me, stepping directly into my path with a forced grin. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, her voice strained. I met her gaze calmly and replied, "Very much." The simplicity of my answer disarmed her. She expected hesitation, insecurity, the old Evelyn. But that woman was long gone. And for the first time, she seemed to realize it. But the night was far from over. Attention was turning toward the stage, where someone was preparing to make a speech meant to honor family unity. A speech my daughter-in-law had planned meticulously. Little did she know, it would become the moment her entire narrative shattered. When the lights dimmed and a soft chime echoed through the hall, everyone turned toward the small stage at the front. My daughter-in-law straightened her spine, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. This was her moment, the one she had orchestrated with obsessive precision. A speech about family unity, new beginnings, and gratitude. A speech designed not to honor anyone, but to showcase herself as the glue that held the entire household together. She stepped onto the stage with a bright, brittle smile. I could almost hear the cracks beneath it. She tapped the microphone, cleared her throat, and began speaking in a voice dripping with performative warmth. "Tonight, we celebrate love, loyalty, and the strength of family. Her words floated across the room like artificial perfume, strong enough to fill the air, but too cheap to hide the truth. She talked about sacrifice, about commitment, about standing together through challenges. I watched her eyes dart toward me between sentences, checking to see if I looked small, wounded, defeated. But I didn't. I stood tall, hands folded calmly, Andrew beside me like an anchor. Each time she saw me unmoved, her voice faltered, just a little, just enough to show the tension tightening in her throat. Then she brought up her sister, the woman who married my husband. She praised her grace and devotion, calling their marriage inspiring. The guests shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the rumors. They all sensed the cracks. But my daughter-in-law kept pushing the narrative, determined to plaster over the fractures with hollow words. Her sister stood near the stage, face pale, eyes glossy with embarrassment. She knew the performance wasn't for the crowd, it was for me. Finally, she invited my husband to join her on stage. That was the moment everything changed. He stood slowly, hesitantly, as if each step weighed more than the last. When he reached the microphone, my daughter-in-law touched his arm possessively, smiling wider than ever. But he didn't smile back. He stared into the crowd, and his eyes found mine instantly. The room grew, so still I could hear my own heartbeat. He began speaking, but not with her rehearsed script. His voice was low, uneven, painfully honest. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said, clearing his throat. "It means a great deal to us." Us. The word landed flat, without conviction. My daughter-in-law stiffened beside him. He continued, "Family is complicated. And sometimes we make choices out of fear, or pressure, or confusion." A murmur rippled through the room. She grabbed his arm again, this time not lovingly, but warningly. He ignored her. "And sometimes," he said, voice breaking slightly, "we hurt the people who never deserved to be hurt. People who gave us nothing but love." His gaze never left mine. The room inhaled sharply, the tension snapping like a tight wire. My daughter-in-law whispered something through clenched teeth, but he didn't stop. "I haven't been the man I should have been," he continued. "And I owe someone an apology. A real one." He paused. The hall fell into complete silence. "Evelyn," he said, speaking my name with a trembling sincerity. "I'm sorry." Gasps erupted. Heads turned toward me. My daughter-in-law froze beside him, her smile collapsing. Her sister's eyes filled with tears, not from sentiment, but from terror. The entire facade, the marriage, the manipulation, the image, was unraveling in front of everyone. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because this moment wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs to crumble beneath. And crumble it would. The room dissolved into a low, shocked murmur after his apology. Guests whispered frantically, eyes darting between the stage and me as if trying to piece together a puzzle they suddenly realized was upside down. My daughter-in-law stood frozen beside him, her face drained of color, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the tension from across the hall. She had lost control, not gradually but in a single, devastating blow. She leaned toward my husband, hissing something under her breath, but he pulled his arm away with a quiet firmness that spoke louder than any argument. It was the first time in years I had seen him push back against her. The first time he stood as his own man, not as a puppet tangled in her strings. And in that moment, the truth finally showed itself in his eyes. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost himself. His wife, the sister, stepped forward, trembling. "What are you doing?" she whispered, voice cracking under the weight of raw humiliation. Her hands shook as she reached for him, but he stepped back slightly, just enough for the crowd to notice. That tiny movement broke something inside her. She covered her mouth with shaking fingers, tears slipping down her cheeks as she looked between him and her manipulative sister, the architect of her fragile marriage. He wasn't done speaking. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice hollow. "Mistakes I can't undo. But pretending everything is perfect, pretending this marriage was chosen freely, it's destroying all of us." A single gasp echoed through the room, followed by absolute silence. His wife stumbled back a step. My daughter-in-law froze like a statue cracking at its base. Someone in the front row whispered, "He didn't choose her, he was pressured." And suddenly the whispers grew louder, swirling through the crowd like wind feeding a fire. My daughter-in-law slammed her hands onto the microphone. "That's enough," she snapped, voice trembling with rage. "We will not do this here." But the room wasn't on her side anymore. Not tonight. Not after years of manipulation disguised as family guidance. My husband looked out at the guests, then back at me. There was no request in his expression. No plea. No expectation. Just truth. Painful, overdue truth, finally given air to breathe. And then he stepped away from the podium, ignoring the furious whisper of my daughter-in-law begging him to fix it. His wife ran out of the hall, sobbing. My daughter-in-law stormed after her, eyes blazing, her reputation slipping from her fingers like sand. The crowd buzzed, not with excitement, but with revelation. The truth was out. Their facade had collapsed. Their perfect image had shattered. And in the middle of all that chaos, I stood still, calm, untouched. Because for the first time in years, the truth didn't hurt me. It freed me. Andrew stepped closer, gently placing a hand on my back. "Are you all right?" he whispered. I nodded, feeling the weight of the past lifting like a curtain finally pulled open. But the night wasn't over. There was still one more moment ahead, the moment that would silence the entire room and leave no more questions about where my husband's heart truly belonged. The chaos had barely settled when my husband stepped off the stage. Guests parted for him instinctively, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. No one knew where he was going, what he would say, or who he would confront next. My daughter-in-law had vanished into a corridor chasing her sister, desperate to glue back together the life she had fractured. But my husband, he walked slowly, purposefully, through the center of the hall, toward me. Every footstep echoed. Every whisper faded. Every eye locked on us. I felt Andrew shift beside me, ready to give me space if I needed it. But I remained still, standing tall in my silver dress, refusing to shrink back into the woman I used to be. When my husband finally reached me, he stopped only an arm's length away. Up close, he looked devastated, a man unraveling truths he had buried under years of pressure, guilt, and silence. "Evelyn," he began, voice hoarse. The room went silent again, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to hear. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," he said, "and I'm not here to make excuses." He took a breath, a deep, trembling one. "I just want you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. And nothing I've built since then, nothing, has ever come close to the life I had with you." His words rang through the room like a bell struck in the center of a cathedral. Some guests gasped. Others bowed their heads. A few exchanged glances filled with pity, not for me this time, but for him. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I let him continue, because this moment was not mine to carry, it was his to release. "I don't expect anything," he whispered. "Not reconciliation. Not hope. I just needed you to hear the truth from me, without them in the way. You deserve that much." He stepped back slightly, waiting, not for my forgiveness, but for my truth. And I gave it to him. "Thank you for saying it," I replied softly. "But the life you want back no longer exists. I'm not the woman you left, and you're not the man I once loved." A soft murmur rippled through the hall. He closed his eyes as if the words pierced him, but when he opened them, there was something else there. Acceptance. Sorrow. And strangely peace. I continued, my voice steady. "You didn't lose me tonight. You lost me years ago, when you chose their voices over your own." I gestured gently toward the hallway, where his wife and my daughter-in-law had disappeared. "And now you have to choose for yourself. Not for them. And not for me." He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of a truth he could no longer escape. "I understand," he whispered. I turned slightly toward Andrew, not dramatically, not to wound him, but because life was already moving forward. Andrew offered me a small, steady smile, the kind that speaks of new chapters, not old wounds. My husband watched this, his expression collapsing into something bittersweet. Not jealousy, not anger, just realization that life doesn't wait for the repentant. I hope you're happy, he said, voice breaking softly. You deserve it more than anyone. And this time, I believed him. I touched his arm lightly, one final gesture of closure, and answered, I will be. Then I walked away, not with triumph, not with revenge, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had finally reclaimed her own story. The room remained silent as I crossed it, not in shock, but in respect. And somewhere behind me, the life they stole from me shattered completely. So, another one, my own, could begin again. The end.